I mean, y'all had to know this was coming eventually, right? We ranked every music video, we ranked every song, and now we're gonna rank every album. I feel like I've definitely mentioned my favorite and least favorite Taylor Swift albums and aspects of this ranking at points on this channel before. So I don't know if this will be much of a shock for people who have been watching my videos for a while, but I don't know, I thought it would be fun to more definitively decide and tell y'all what my favorite Taylor albums really are, not just the songs. Because as I've said before, and will continue to say, albums really are more than just the sum of their parts. Especially for an artist like Taylor Swift, who is so very intentional about how she constructs her albums, how she paints a story from song to song. In fact, I was actually kind of curious if I took the average ranking I gave to each song on each album and compared them. I was curious to see would that align with my rankings of the albums themselves. And not really, honestly. They're kind of different. I can talk more about that at the end of the video and reveal to y'all what those were. Hold on, there's an ant on my wall. Okay, sorry about that. The way I went about this is I kind of ranked these as what albums do I come back to the most often. Taylor is my favorite artist, and being that I like all of her albums, I think they're all very excellent and profound in their own ways. They all have at least a few songs that I love, if not many songs that I love. So what sets the albums apart for me is really what albums make for overall better listening experiences from start to finish. And that has to do not just with what songs are present, but also the order of the songs, the energy and vibes of the album, how it ebbs and flows throughout its runtime. What you'll notice is I think the best albums can set the mood for me and really wrap me in and take me on an emotional journey, whereas the Taylor albums I don't come back to as often require a certain mood for me to want to listen to them, if that makes sense. So in that sense, they certainly have their time and place. There are moments where suddenly that'll be my favorite album that I can't stop listening to. But in the grander scheme of things, I prefer and rank higher those albums that I can always come back to as yeah, I know I'm gonna have a good time listening to this album no matter what. So that's what we're gonna be doing today. My commentary might not be as in-depth as maybe you might expect or as I might hope to. I haven't had as much time to put together this script. Things are getting busy. But I thought this would be fun. This will be fun. Whenever I'm struggling to figure out what I want to do, I just talk about Taylor Swift. That's easy for me to do. In fact, a couple notes about this channel going forward. Skip ahead if you'd like. The votes are in, and I'm going to be doing Billie Eilish for my next full discography ranking. Hopefully that'll come out either for my next video or the following one. I don't know. It takes a while I have to rank all the songs and I have to gather all the footage and edit the whole video together. So yeah, it's going to take a while, but it will happen eventually. I'm very excited. And I will say I'm probably not going to be doing a video next Friday actually because I'm traveling that weekend and I do need a little bit of a break. But hopefully I can come back to weekly content after next Friday. Okay, that's all actually that I had to say. I thought I had more, but that's it. Okay, so without further ado, let's begin. This is ranking every Taylor Swift album.
Old faded blue jeans and you think Tim McGraw. I hope you think of me.
I mean, is anyone really surprised by this? I'm sorry, but if you think Debut is one of Taylor Swift's best albums, you're not quirky, you're not like other Swifties. You're just kind of wrong. It certainly has its moments. The highs of this album are really special to me, and there's quite a few songs on this that feel on par with her normal output even to this day and that have stood the test of time as classics in Taylor's discography. Teardrops on My Guitar, Should Have Said No, Our Song, and in my opinion, I would add Mary's Song and Tim McGraw to that list as well. However, there's a lot of songs on this album that feel much more undercooked and clearly feel like part of a debut record where she was still finding her footing and sound rather than the evolved sound that we've come to love Taylor for. She wrote a lot of these when she was only 13 or 14, and in some of these songs it does kind of show. It gives off somewhat of an underdeveloped vibe, almost immature. I don't want to say immature though because I don't want to mean she was immature in these songs. That's definitely not the case. They are mature songs for her age. But again, that age really does show through on this album. Maybe the re-recording with her entirely new grown-up voice will change that, but for now, I think this remains just kind of her most underwhelming album. A lot of people harp on Debut for being so heavy on country and the yeehaw vibes, but that's not really the issue in my opinion, because the good songs on this album, like I said, are still quite good while being super country. It's more the fact that, again, there's an overall youthful vibe on this album that hasn't stood the test of time in my opinion, and she just has better country albums. Not much else to say. Debut's cute, moving right along. Fearless is similar to Debut, but it's better. While this album was certainly a big step up from debut, as I see it, and a large refinement of that young country sound, it still has elements of that make it a little less timeless, so to say, than her other albums. Again, for the age she was at, for what she was doing, this is incredible work. I particularly love how this album begins to introduce more pop elements mixed into the country, making for some really iconic songs that remain to this day some of her most beloved and popular among non-Swifties as well. And I also like how this album incorporates more of a narrative throughout its runtime, something that would become a staple of all of her albums to come after. The highs on this album are amazing, even better than debut, honestly. Love Story, Fearless, Forever and Always. She really begins to refine her storytelling on this album and play around with the production and emotion on these songs. There's a clear concept that is genuinely quite well executed and makes for a fun listening experience. I am not a Fearless hater by any means, but again, in the context of everything else she's given us since the 15 years after this record was released, it doesn't hold up as strong as other albums in my opinion, and that mainly comes down to the quality of the songs themselves. Again, the highs are great, but still aren't quite as strong as the highs of her remaining albums, and there's a lot of songs that are just kind of whatever to me. There's still that I'm young and in love, I just want a guy who likes me for who I am, I'm not like other girls vibe on some songs in this album that make it feel a little more childish, I guess, than her later albums centered around love and heartbreak. I mean, I feel like she kind of did away with that starting with Speak Now. And the difference in songwriting and maturity overall is pretty clear there. So yeah, definitely not bad by any means, and a significant step up from debut, but it still ends up toward the bottom for me. Now this is where I think things truly start to get controversial.
Meet me at midnight.
I'm already prepared for the Swifties to come after me for this ranking, but I know the Midnight Stands are furious in the comments. I already know it. Honestly, these next few albums were really difficult to rank because we're starting to reach albums that I know were very special to me at some point, mainly when they came out, and have really great moments and masterful songs. But I have to be fully honest with y'all, Midnights is one of Taylor Swift's weakest albums. And again, I have to clarify, I don't hate this album. I always have to clarify that in my rankings. Just because something is ranked lower doesn't mean I feel negatively about it, but it suffers a similar issue to Fearless. It knows its concept well, it's a strong realization of that concept, and it remains fairly cohesive throughout its runtime because it sticks to that concept pretty consistently. I just find a lot of the songs on this album to be kinda boring and underwhelming, and it's really the second half of the album. The thing about Midnights is it starts off super strong. The first 6 tracks of this album are very cohesive and paint the narrative of this album, the whole concept of these dark, lonely, haunting nights. Lavender Haze, Maroon, You're on Your Own Kid, Midnight Rain, these are some of Taylor's best, most iconic songs, certainly. But after that, the rest of the album is just not very interesting to me. Taken individually, a lot of these remaining songs are very heartfelt and interesting, but put all together, it becomes pretty monotonous pretty quickly. Honestly, much more than the Tortured Poets Department, even though that's the album that gets criticized far more for being monotonous and boring. Bejeweled is easily the highlight of the second half. Mastermind is a great closer, but everything else in between is either lackluster or good, but not enough to save the whole listening experience for me. And the 3am tracks are great. They're honestly much more fitting to the original concept and the dark tone of Midnights to me than the main track list. And some of these songs being left off the main track list is honestly just criminal. Like The Great War, Would've, Could've, Should've, You're Losing Me, Are You Kidding Me? The 3am and deluxe versions of this album aren't perfect by any means. They still have their inconsistencies and that they kind of jump back and forth between these jaw-dropping incredible songs and kind of whatever songs. And the biggest issue above all is they're not part of the main track list. Hits Different and You're Losing Me are easily 2 of the best songs to come out of this era, but they were just side tracks. They're not even part of the 3am edition. She just had them as unreleased and was like, here you go, here's another song. So to me, when I'm thinking of the Midnights album, when I'm thinking of the era, it's hard to really consider those songs because I don't really feel like they're part of the album because they're not. That even goes with the 3am tracks. They're there, they're great. They were released very closely to the main album. So when I think of Midnights, I do think of those songs. But again, the album is still the standard edition. Is that making sense? I don't know. When Taylor puts out an album, she's very intentional about the tracks she chooses to put on the main edition versus on the deluxe. So when I'm thinking about the album, my mind first goes to the main album. I mean, that's the point of the rollout. It's unfortunate that the deluxe tracks are a lot better than the main track list. I wish she put them on the main track list, but she didn't. They're still just deluxe tracks. I don't know, that's my best attempt at explaining this. This is definitely, in my opinion, going to be the most controversial ranking out of any. But yeah, let's just move on.
Ah! lover.
This is going to sound so hypocritical, but I feel like one thing that really determines for me how much I like an album is the opening 5 tracks. I could go into a whole video on this, which I probably will at some point in the future, but Taylor intentionally structures her albums kind of like plays, with an exposition and setup before establishing a conflict, usually around track 5, and then building that through the remainder of the album. So the first 5 tracks form that kind of expositional basis for the rest of the album, which, without all the literary terms, really just means that the first 5 songs kind of set the tone for everything else. And I know that that's hypocritical because I just said Midnights has a really strong start, but because of that, I think it causes the second half to feel even more underwhelming because we were set up with such greatness and then it doesn't really hold up throughout the runtime. With Lover, it's kind of the opposite issue. Lover's first 5 tracks are probably the most disorganized first 5 tracks of any Taylor Swift album other than maybe like TTPD, which we'll get to. And that doesn't mean they're bad. That's not what I'm saying. Cruel Summer remains Song of the Century, and it always will be Song of the Century. And The Archer remains to this day my go-to song when I want to cry. This is all still true. But these tracks, when you look at these first 5 tracks, they're kind of all over the place. They jump between so many different vibes and themes all at once, and they're individually great in their own ways. But again, it's about the tone it's setting up for the rest of the album. It kind of sets this album up as a disorganized listening experience, which it unfortunately is. I am still not over the triple threat that is London Boy, followed by Soon You'll Get Better, followed by False God. Y'all know I love to do album analyses on this channel, and I will stretch things for miles to explain choices that these artists make and try to make sense of everything because I truly believe every choice when crafting albums is intentional, especially for someone like Taylor Swift. But I have no explanation for this one, y'all. This is just... it was a choice. I think this album is constantly ragged on for containing Taylor's worst songs and being her most just like quirky, experimental era. But honestly, the worst songs on this album are not that bad. I think really the issue is that because this album in particular was trying to tackle so many different things at once, and it really explores various facets of love and anxiety and politics and family and all these different things, it ends up feeling somewhat unfocused. So while there's many songs on this album I absolutely adore, there's so much brilliance in the stories it tells about those topics, about what it means to be a lover more than anything else, I do think it still ultimately comes out as one of Taylor's weaker albums. Wow, I feel like I said many different controversial things at once. The comments on this one are going to be a doozy, that's for sure.
And for a fortnight there we were forever.
Alright, here we go. I'm talking about the Tortured Poets department again. The number one issue with this album, as I've said before, is the lack of sonic cohesion, which makes the overall listening experience of this album feel far more drawn out than it needs to be. There are quite a few tracks on this album that really just didn't need to be there. Like, from a lyrical perspective, I can understand the whole story being told, but there's a lot of production choices that don't make sense to me. Why are the title track and My Boy Only Breaks His Favorite Toys produced exactly like 1989 Vault tracks, when the surrounding tracks are more honed into the muted, Cynthia echoey sound more consistent to Midnights and the rest of this album? Why do we explore this really beautiful mix of country and synth on But Daddy I Love Him and Fresh Out the Slammer, and then once again drop that for these other sounds that she's already done better in other albums? I still don't like I Can Fix Him, I still don't like The Alchemy, y'all have yet to convince me otherwise about these songs. It effectively falls in the same category as Lover and Midnights. All of these albums have really good moments and profound themes, and the stories they tell are really beautiful and clearly heartfelt to Taylor, but they're just a little bit all over the place. And so compared to her other albums that have the same good moments, but also maintain sonic and narrative cohesion throughout their entire runtime, and don't have moments where the energy really dips, like, yeah, those are just better albums. The reason though I ended up placing the Tortured Poets department higher than Lover and Midnights is really in the unhinged emotional nature of this album, because it's so cathartic, because it's so free and vulnerable and just kind of lets everything out. It makes the highs on this album feel so emotional and so powerful, and they really do draw you in and cut deep. But Daddy I Love Him still makes me want to run through a town square as if I'm some scorned upon damsel. LOML still makes me cry. Like, this album definitely has its moments. And that's not even mentioning the anthology, which is pretty much skipless to me and is very consistent throughout its runtime in just being heartfelt and acoustic and really story-based. If that was its own album, I would probably rank it much higher, but again, to stay true to the format of the video, these are just kind of deluxe tracks alongside the main Tortured Poets department album. Ultimately, I've said this before and I'll say it again, The Tortured Poets department reeks of missed potential. I'm so glad this project exists in the sole fact that it allowed Taylor to get all these emotions and things off her chest that she'd clearly been needing to talk and write about. And I understand how that has naturally lent itself to make the album a bit messier, but I think some work refining the choice and ordering of tracks would have really taken this album to the next level. And y'all are gonna hate me when I talk about Red, because frankly, Red has all the same issues as the Tortured Poets department, and yet for some reason I would rather die for that album. But we'll talk more about it when we get there. I only realized while sitting down to do this ranking and listening back to all her albums that I have been doing Speak Now a disservice. For some reason, I've always considered this in her bottom 3. It was always Debut, then Fearless, then Speak Now, and then everything else depending on my mood. But like after sitting down with all the albums, this album is really good, and I don't know why it's taken me so long to see it. Actually, I do know exactly why. Yeah, sorry. Speak Now Taylor's version mildly ruined Speak Now for me. Wow, I'm just getting more and more controversial as this video progresses. And that's not just like the album's existence itself, but more like the era as a whole. I mean, I feel like these re-recordings are celebrations of the original work in a way, and bringing all those songs we love back in a new light. But this entire era in particular was just people either talking about the Better Than Revenge lyric change or going crazy over I Can See You, which is still, in my opinion, one of the most underwhelming Vault tracks she's released. And Taylor herself is not off the hook. In my opinion, the Speak Now Vault overall is the weakest of them all. Yes, including the Fearless Vault. And the re-recordings at large are fine, but there's minute details missing from the original album that make some re-records feel a bit disappointing. This was also amidst Taylor just being somewhat questionable in many different ways. I don't know, it was just a weird time, but once I put all my grudges aside and I just sat down to re-listen to this album, removed from that context, I realized just how many phenomenal songs are on this album. While I do like Red more for the sheer emotional roller coaster of that album, Speak Now feels like her most mature country sound to date. Mine, Back to December, Enchanted, Haunted, Last Kiss, Long Live, like this album is just full of these beautiful and incredibly mature love songs, which is crazy considering she wrote this entire album by herself. Like, that continues to astonish me. All my skips only really appear on the deluxe edition or from the vault. Like, when you look at just the standard edition of this album, it's pretty much flawless, other than, yes, a notably immature but still very catchy fight song, and another solid song that just has the unfortunate situation of being about a terrible person. But like, holy shit. This album is good. All these songs are so beautiful and mature that the whole listening experience feels very put together. It feels very refined. This is just a great album, and I'm definitely going to start listening to Speak Now much more going forward.
For a weekend, so it's gonna be forever, or it's gonna go down in flames.
This is the Pop Bible. 1989 is the Pop Bible, and it always will be the Pop Bible. The beginning of this album is phenomenal. There's an interesting thing she does with tempo where all of these beginning tracks kind of maintain roughly the same tempo to really establish this pop setting she was coming into with this album. And it also, in my opinion, contains her best 3-track run ever. Blank Space, Style, and Out of the Woods. Like, it really does not get better than this. And that energy is maintained really spectacularly after track 5 as well. Y'all know Wildest Dreams is like, I fucking adore that song with all my heart, and this is just a phenomenal album. I don't know what else to say. I don't really know if there's much explanation needed. It's 1989. Like, come on. I do think the later parts of this album try to get a bit more sentimental and vary up the sound a bit. You know, songs like This Love and Clean, they're a bit more muted, and I Know Places is more dark, romantic vibes, you know. And in that sense, the individual songs are all great, but I think the overall listening experience in that latter half is not as powerful as it could have been just towards the ending. Clean is still a phenomenal closer. I just wish the tracks building up to that maintained some of that pop fun energy from the beginning. Also, not including New Romantics on the main track list was just immediately points off. Like, come on, are we serious? But yeah, other than that, this is just the shit. Like, I will always come back to this album when I'm looking to have fun, when I'm looking to bop my ass a little bit. Always. 1989 is just the go-to for pop music. It really is.
When you are young, they assume you know nothing.
As I've talked about before, Folklore was a first for Taylor in a lot of different ways. It was her first time dropping a surprise album, her first time going this deep into her acoustic side, working with Aaron Dessner very closely. Her first time telling stories not just about herself, but about these made-up characters. And for those reasons, Folklore probably remains one of Taylor Swift's most defining eras of her whole career. Like, I really don't know if we'll ever get anything quite like this album. On an objective scale, I don't know anyone who doesn't like this album, like genuinely. I don't know anyone who doesn't consider this one of her best albums. The songwriting on this album is just brilliant and perfect in so many ways, and I love that Taylor really let herself explore these stories and these feelings and emotions from the perspective of these other characters she created, whether it's the high school love triangle or even on songs like Illicit Affairs and others on this album that have personal touches to Taylor's life and are obviously inspired by her own life experiences, but ultimately really run wild with these other concepts of escapism, of grief, of heartbreak. It's just done so beautifully. I think there are some songs in the second half where the energy kind of drags a little bit and slows down. I still don't really like Betty that much, but this is still a phenomenal album. And again, talking about 3-track runs, Exile, My Tears Ricochet, and Mirrorball is just chef's kiss. It's perfection. We're beginning to enter elite territory. I mean, we're about to enter the top 3 now, so yeah.
I'm begging for you to take my hand, wreck my plans, that's my man.
Evermore is very similar to Folklore. The two albums are very similarly constructed. The vibes are very similar. The songwriting style is very similar. So I knew when I was going to rank all the albums, I knew that these two would kind of be right next to each other. And I also knew they would both be near the top because these are, like I said, some of her most phenomenal, profound work. But as I thought about it, I realized I do slightly prefer Evermore over Folklore. And I think that's due to the more personal nature of this album. Like I said, I think it's brilliant how Taylor explores a lot of different feelings and emotions from the perspective of other characters in Folklore. But I think the fact that Evermore is largely more personal and it feels almost more like unhinged and emotional makes it stand out a bit more to me. I mean, you'll see, you can probably guess the remaining albums, right? These are very emotional, very heartfelt, very driven albums where they have a concept and they just kind of run wild with it and explore all the different facets of it. And I think with Evermore, there's this side of emotional anger, there's this side of grief, and again, escapism, similar to Folklore, but she just really runs wild with it. When one of Taylor Swift's best 3-track runs is the first 3 tracks of the album, like, you know you're in for a good album. Marjorie is my favorite Taylor Swift song about grief, and it's really personal and beautiful. That feeling is just prevalent throughout this whole album. I still really vividly remember my first experience listening to this album as a young little boy, you know. Ew, why did I say that? It wasn't that long ago, please, be so for real. But I remember it. It just takes my breath away every time I listen. That's really what differentiates these top 3 albums. Every time I listen to them, I have to sit down and just listen. Like, I can't be doing something else. I can't let it play in the background. I have to pay attention because they really grab my attention and hook me in, you know? Here we go. Red is that girl. Red is seriously that girl. I don't trust y'all who don't like Red. I don't. Funnily enough, I went back through the Pitchfork reviews of each of these albums. I didn't read them all, but I was just curious about the scores. And interestingly enough, Red is actually the highest rated Taylor Swift album by Pitchfork. This has a 9.0. Isn't that kind of crazy? I mean, I think a lot of her albums deserve higher than what Pitchfork has given them, but obviously Pitchfork is a music reviewer website. This is their job to be critical. I've already talked about this in another video. And I truly believe that the 1 point they took off was for Stay, Stay, Stay. If that song didn't exist, 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10 right there. I'm sorry. Y'all have not convinced me on Stay, Stay, Stay either. That is still... But when I'm listening to this album, I could not care less about that. This is a phenomenal story. This entire album is devoted to what it means to be going through heartbreak and what it means to grieve a relationship. What it means to be so in love in one moment and then not sure if any of it was even real in the next because of how suddenly things can change and how quickly a relationship can end. And it brilliantly captures the highs and lows of those emotions. It's a roller coaster, certainly. It's somewhat all over the place, but for that reason, I love it. All Too Well truly has stood the test of time as one of Taylor Swift's biggest achievements. This is essentially the epitome of Taylor Swift's storytelling. The lyrics are personal yet relatable, simple yet multifaceted, beautiful yet harsh, all at the same time. This is the kind of shit that non-Swifties look at like, huh, seriously, this is what they're going crazy about? But you don't get it until you get it. It's just a red scarf. No, it's not just a red scarf. It's the scarf that she left at his sister's house that still reminds him of this relationship and still reminds him of the innocence and goodness that this relationship once had, that she is constantly reminded of as well. It's a symbol of how they will be connected always, even after this relationship is long gone. Like, it's so good. The first 5-track run of this album is phenomenal. Every single song is a banger, and it really just sets the tone for the emotional roller coaster you're about to hear. It continues to go up and down, exploring all the different feelings with this relationship. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's phenomenal. This will always be one of my favorite albums. Always. Red is that girl. It's that girl.
In the middle of the night, my dreams.
Yeah, it wasn't really even a question. In preparation to put this together, I went back and listened through all of her albums again in the rough order from worst to best that I was planning on ranking them. And honestly, the whole time, I was just so excited to get to Reputation at the end. From the first bassy notes and throat clear of Ready for It, all the way until the final piano of New Year's Day, I am sat throughout this entire album from start to finish and just taken on a journey every single time I listen to it. This album kind of has two sides to it. There's this darker, vengeful side of Taylor making her big comeback after the era that was 2016, after the internet effectively canceled her and wanted to see her fail. And she came back and she expresses so much anger and almost distaste towards the media on that side of the album. It's really loud, it's energetic, it's badass in a way, right? But then there's also the heartfelt, vulnerable, romantic, soulful side of this album that explores the relationship she was kindling with Joe Alwyn. And the two sides perfectly mesh together through the idea of reputation. Even amidst the whole world hating her, even amidst feeling so lonely and dark and being in a dark place, she has this person that she can go back to, that she can rely on, that she can trust. All the different sides of those feelings, all the different elements of that concept are really beautifully explored throughout this album. The first 5 tracks of this album are easily the best opening to any Taylor Swift album, and maybe any album ever. Maybe. I don't know. And you would think that, in my opinion, this album starting off on its best song would be a downfall of the album and would mean that everything else would not hold up. But honestly, it's the opposite. Because Ready for It is so good, because it so perfectly sets up both sides of the album, I'm set. I'm ready to hear the rest of it. I'm ready for it. And the rest of the songs do not disappoint. It's so pretty. It's such a beautiful theme and concept that's explored. I will probably do a whole video on this album and era at some point because it's just that good. This album holds a very special place in my heart. And frankly, I'm a little bit scared about Reputation Taylor's version because I feel like the production on this album is just done so perfectly. I've listened to it so many times that I've kind of just memorized how this entire album goes. I'm really hoping the new version hits the same. I don't know, 1989 Taylor's version has made me skeptical, but it's okay. We'll wait and see. I'm not going to make any judgments until I hear it. In regards to the song averages I wanted to bring up, I'll just kind of put them on the screen. The one on the left is the average for each album ranked from the best song average to the worst when including every track, including deluxe, including vault tracks, and the one on the right is just the standard edition of each album. So not only will you notice some pretty significant changes between them, but you'll also notice that this doesn't really fit quite exactly with my own ranking. A really interesting phenomenon with this is that for all of her older albums like Debut, Fearless, Speak Now, and Red, the scores get better, as in they decrease, right? Because the song average gets better. Their scores get better when I remove the deluxe tracks, versus with her most recent albums like Midnights and the Tortured Poets Department, the scores actually get significantly worse when I remove the deluxe tracks. I don't know. I just thought that's interesting. I think it's weird that Taylor is putting more effort into her deluxe tracks than the main albums nowadays, but I don't know, hopefully that changes. If we get another double album, I swear to God. Anyways, that's the video. Let me know what you thought. If you agree or disagree, please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of stuff. It really means a lot to me. And I'll see y'all probably in a couple weeks. Yeah, probably in a couple weeks. Okay, bye!